Considering the competitiveness of the Red Bull car at the moment, a seat at the team has to be the most desired home for an F1 driver in the sport. If you don't mind the politics that comes with it, of course. When Daniel Ricciardo took on the role of reserve driver and PR superstar for the Red Bull team in 2023, all anyone could talk about was how he was placed there to pressurize Sergio Perez. Then, when Nyck De Vries met his untimely end at the hands of Helmut Marko, a fate possibly worse than death, Ricciardo secured himself a seat at the then called Alpha Tauri team, and again, he was definitely there because he was going to replace Sergio Perez when the time came. It was obvious that McLaren were the problem, not Daniel, and back at Red Bull, his original home in the sport, he was ready to return to his former best. Christian Horner even went as far as saying that they were seeing the old Daniel in the simulator. But despite an impressive 7th place in Mexico last year, Ricciardo has failed to perform, proving all of us wrong regarding his imminent ascension to the Red Bull team. So, what's going on with Daniel Ricciardo? And what does it mean for Sergio Perez and the second seat at Red Bull? The newly named RB team was billed to be an absolute battleground this season, with Yuki Tsunoda having to prove his worth to Red Bull over a massively talked up Daniel Ricciardo. In Bahrain, they lived up to that billing. The RB drivers found themselves at the center of a team orders storm in the closing laps of the season opener, with Tsunoda instructed to swap places with Ricciardo as the pair pursued the 12th placed Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Despite eventually surrendering to the demand, Tsunoda was heard voicing his displeasure with a request over team radio, with the Japanese driver crossing the line behind Ricciardo in 14th place. After the race came an extraordinary series of events on the cooldown lap, when Tsunoda almost made contact with Ricciardo while dive-bombing him at turn 8, then locking up, then passing within a whisper of Ricciardo's left wheel into turn 9. The Aussie quite fairly described his teammate as a effing helmet over team radio. Yuki, though, was rightly furious. Team orders in the first race of the season over 12th place is, and I'm sure you'll agree, a bit of a joke. Yuki gave a very PR-friendly apology after the race, and presumably after a stern talking to from someone at RB. While everyone was friends in the public eye after the race though, a trend for the season had clearly been set. Tsunoda and Ricciardo are both out of contract at the end of the year and will both be desperate to continue, especially with that second seat at Red Bull the potential grand prize for one of them. Interestingly, after the race, Helmut Marko expressed sympathy for Tsunoda, claiming the Japanese driver could have scored the final point for 10th if his strategy had been better. Potentially an early bit of side picking from the man who might have the most say in Red Bull driver contracts. He told Austrian publication OE24, "The theatre could have been avoided. I spoke to Yuki afterwards. With the right strategy, he could have finished 10th. The team orders switch in Bahrain meant that Daniel took the first win in the head-to-head, but with a very big asterisk next to it. But in Saudi Arabia, Yuki hit back big time, or he did in qualifying at least. In the Saturday sessions, or I guess I should say Friday with the rejigged running order, it's 2-0 to Tsunoda so far. While Tsunoda was 0.007 seconds shy of a place in Q3 in Bahrain, Ricciardo was 14th, almost a 10th and a half adrift. Then in Jeddah, Tsunoda put RB into Q3 for the first time this year and was 4 tenths quicker than Ricciardo. Qualifying was hardly a disaster for Ricciardo. Sometimes a single tiny mistake can make a difference of 4 tenths, but in the race he failed to right his wrongs. Ricciardo had the misfortune of a slow pit stop in the region of 40 seconds, but at that point he was already several places behind a points-contending Tsunoda, and Ricciardo couldn't make progress at the back of the pack. Instead, he spun all by himself out of turn 1, ironically right in front of the driver he'd love to replace at Red Bull, Sergio Perez, who was about to lap him. If you were to look at just the finishing positions from Saudi Arabia, then Yuki being just a place ahead of Ricciardo would have made it seem like a close fight between the two, but that doesn't tell the true story. A 5-second penalty for an unsafe release, which was not Tsunoda's fault, cost him a place post-race, and he was far from the only driver to get caught up behind Magnussen, and it was his attempts to pass the Haas driver that cost him more places. After the race, Daniel Ricciardo revealed that his RBF1 car wasn't quite right in Saudi Arabia. Reflecting on his weekend, Ricciardo said, "It was always going to be an uphill battle. We simply don't have everything functioning at 100%. We see a few flaws, honestly, with the car, so we've got to get that fixed for the next one." Despite his struggles, Ricciardo is confident he can turn things around. "The reason I'm staying optimistic is because I know that we had some things wrong. With a good car and everything sorted, I know we can do a lot better. So, painful 3 days, but I don't want to take any confidence out of us." With his home race in Australia just around the corner, Daniel will need more than just confidence to get his fans excited. With fellow Australasian Liam Lawson waiting in the wings for his F1 opportunity, there won't be any more than one seat available at RB, never mind Red Bull, if Daniel can't turn things around. Covering the race for Channel 4 in the UK, Jolyon Palmer said after Daniel's late spin, "You could easily forget that he's been at the race here today, and Bottas further back. The two of them have been running around at the back all Grand Prix really. Joe is now behind them with that long pit stop, but Daniel Ricciardo was overshadowed pretty majorly by Yuki Tsunoda this weekend. Yuki, up into Q3, was fighting with Kevin Magnussen in the midfield scramble for a look at a point, but Daniel's never quite looked hooked up here. There is no avoiding it. Ricciardo hasn't reverted to the driver that won 7 races for Red Bull and challenged Max Verstappen. The standout theme of Ricciardo's last season at McLaren was that Lando Norris was performing while Daniel just couldn't get anything out of the car. At the time, that was blamed on a very difficult car to drive, something that the team owned up to. But Norris was coping, so why wasn't Ricciardo? While we are only 2 races into the 2024 season, there is already a slight pattern appearing. Yuki is getting more out of the car, while Daniel is complaining that he can't get it dialed in. Now, it's far too early to start saying that Ricciardo is out of the running for the Red Bull second seat, or that a Nyck De Vries style mid-season switch is on the cards. No one should be saying that Yuki is going to be the one to replace Perez either. It's still far too early for any of that talk, but the prologue of that story is starting to be written. And with Sergio Perez performing as well as he has so far, his potential replacements still need to prove they can be better than him, not just the best of the contenders. Checo might not be pushing his teammate at all, but 2 very comfortable second places is all that Red Bull want from him, and he's done it without any fuss. The Red Bull team is starting to see the same storyline I've been describing as well. Writing in a column for Speed Week, Helmut Marko made it clear that he expects more from Ricciardo. There's a lot at stake this season for both Yuki and Daniel. Yuki's qualifying performance was very good, and Ricciardo has to come up with something. The Austrian, though, is looking for improvements from RB as a whole, as the team has struggled for pace in the Grand Prix, with Tsunoda dropping from 9th to 14th in Saudi Arabia. Where there is work, Marko added, at least Tsunoda is very good in qualifying. Then they're at the top of the World Championship points in the first stint, only to fall further and further afterwards. They cannot maintain the speed in the long term. Whether they're putting too much strain on the tyres or there are other reasons is what they need to find out. While it is still likely that Sergio Perez will be replaced by Red Bull, the question of by whom has never been harder to answer. With Ricciardo faltering, Yuki out of favour with Red Bull, Checo performing perfectly, and over half the grid out of contract in 2025, you would be brave to bet on either of the RB drivers being sat in a Red Bull next season. What's your opinion on both RB drivers' starts to the season? Has it swayed you in any way on who should be driving for Red Bull in 2025? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.